Hey everyone, happy Friday. It's just after the middle of January, and we've just completed our 5-day fashion manufacturing challenge. And what happens in January is that very often people, after Christmas, they feel optimistic. It's a new year, new ideas, new beginnings. So they think, okay, it's a little bit like going to the gym. So they think that this year is the year when I'm going to make this idea that I've had in my brain happen. So they start launching their brands. To many that means just creating a logo and just rushing out to find manufacturers. And a lot of factories are then flooded with inquiries, and they start dreading when the phone rings or when they open an email with an avalanche of emails with inquiries that very often make very little sense to them, or they're incomplete. And a lot of manufacturers just dread January. So with that in mind, and having completed and the challenge for the people who participated, hopefully now they know how to approach manufacturers in a manner that will be professional, and manufacturers will be surprised to see a professional inquiry and be delighted to pick up the phone and respond or reply by email. But with that in mind, I thought that actually I complete this 5-day challenge with a talk on the 5 reasons. I've narrowed it down to 5. The 5 reasons why fashion manufacturers are not crazy, and they don't they don't go into with massive enthusiasm into working with fashion startups and small brands. In fact, in the past 1 year, I have met many manufacturers who, when I've talked about different clients looking for, things that I can potentially put them together, introduce them, etc., or work with them on projects, I have never had so many manufacturers ask me politely and just ask me not to take offense at the fact that they don't want to work with small brands and startups. So they're like, please, that's it, just don't put us in touch. And initially, I was a little bit surprised, but over time, this kept on happening. So I started, talking a little bit more with them about the reasons. And like I said, on our blog, we have written a couple of articles about it. But I have managed to compile all the different talks and reasons, etc., and narrow it down to 5, which I want to go through with you just to help you understand what manufacturers are faced with when you make all of these inquiries to them, why they don't respond, why they don't really, they're hesitant to work with you if they even agree with working with you, and how, there's some little small changes that you can do to change that, to improve that situation. So without further ado, Reason number one is everyone basically says that small brands and fashionpreneurs, even if they come with experience from other industries, etc., they come with a false sense of confidence that they know how it works, when in fact, really, they have a huge gap of knowledge, real lack of knowledge, which prevents them to work effectively with the manufacturers. So what that means, they lack processes. They don't really understand how the industry works. And as a result, they think that, the way they can present their idea, just because it's in their head and they've lived with it for such a long time, it would be easy for the other person to understand it. Yet they cannot really explain it. They lack the skills, the vocabulary, to explain effectively what they want made. They haven't done enough research, and even if you don't know, as we learned in the challenge, even if you don't know, there's plenty of ways and resources out on the internet where you can find, whether it's visually or via learning, the words, the terminology for new techniques, but you can prepare yourself and go a little bit more prepared to a manufacturer and show them that you have, tried and made some attempts to prepare for that inquiry. Instead, what happens is that many inquiries are super vague. They have no idea what materials they want to make it. They have no idea of the process of making something. They don't even very often bother to read the manufacturer's website and understand what they specialize in, what they do. And therefore, they send them the wrong inquiries. Or there's plenty of directories that are not filtered enough, and and they're not specific enough. So if inquiries are coming via them, they just accept inquiries for all kinds of different products. So for instance, I was working, with a factory that did high-end fashion, and they were repeatedly getting inquiries for t-shirts and sweatshirts. And that frustrates manufacturers. So this lack of knowledge of process, of how the industry works, and also pricing. Most people go without an idea of what they want their cost price to be of the product. So they call factories, and very often they call the wrong factories. They call a factory because they haven't done the research to see what the factory specializes in. They call the factory asking for a product that A, the factory probably doesn't do, but B, also with A, they don't know what the price is, but if they come up with a price very spontaneously on the call, they come up with the wrong price, with something that is really cheap, something that they've just literally clutched from the air. And that not only frustrates the manufacturers, but it also is disrespectful for them, because it makes them feel that, their labor, and they work really hard, their labor is not appreciated. So that is probably the biggest reason why manufacturers don't like working with small brands, lack of knowledge. Number 2 is unrealistic expectations. Because that's a result, again, of the lack of knowledge of how the processes work, how the industry works, etc. But very often, small brands, entrepreneurs, they take their time to, think through things, talk to people, develop their idea, etc. And when it comes to contacting a manufacturer, they want it yesterday. And that's a common mistake that everyone wants. They want it yesterday. So they then start crying to manufacturers. They start emotionally trying to blackmail them, making promises, telling them how creative they are, important they are, etc. And at the end of the day, a manufacturer is in business. This is their business. They don't want to be emotionally blackmailed. They don't want to be put in a position where they have no choice but agree with you reluctantly, and then really literally kick themselves for agreeing, or then just not deliver, or deliver shoddy product, which then damages their reputation, because everyone knows that it's a small industry. If you disappoint someone, it's just going to go around. And even if you try your best, but because of the lack of knowledge and other information provided to you, you end up not delivering a product matching to your idea, you are going to go around, perhaps leave a bad Google review for their factory, badmouth them, etc. And it's just a really negative experience for everyone. So this mentality of I want it yesterday, it really needs to change, and that's what manufacturers are really afraid of, and the fact that they have to explain to everyone why that cannot happen. Another thing, again, is unrealistic expectation is, again, touching on the price point, not realizing what something will cost to make, not really having a clear positioning on where you want to position your product, wanting to make perhaps something really beautiful with lots of detailing, with lots of trims, particular stitching techniques, etc., but wanting to compete with a high street brand and have a really cheap price. And also wanting a small number of units to be made. So that is just unrealistic. If you had done your research, if you speak to factory, go visit factories, talk to designers, etc., and understand the process, you will understand that everything comes at a price. All of these different techniques that you perhaps want, the more detailing, the more expensive materials you use, they all come into the cost price. Then you cannot have, something for the price of a pizza, right? So that is to do with costing. One more unrealistic expectation that many people have is that they speak to factories, that they get really taken by the fact that this factory works with their favorite brand or with really well-known names, etc., completely overlooking the fact that the reason they work with these brands is because these brands are in business, have been in business for many years. They have established way of working. They meet probably the minimum or the quantities that these factories require. And all of a sudden, these new inquiries they receive are therefore tiny little quantities, or they promise, perhaps the entrepreneur, the small brand will promise to meet the quantities. They will go through the sampling, and I've been in that situation with clients. They will go through the sampling process, which all manufacturers, quite frankly, hate doing, because they spend so much time learning about your product, how to make it. It takes numerous attempts, sometimes prototype samples, etc. This is a lot of time that they can't necessarily capitalize. They might charge you a little bit extra for a sample, they might charge you a one-off fee, but they would never really properly make money on the time they would spend trying to understand your idea. So they spend all of this time, and then they receive a tiny little order. And what do? Do they completely lose you as a client and write off all the time they spent on you? Or do they hope, fingers crossed, hope and pray that if they do this order, you will then next time have more? But very often what happens is that there is no more. There is no next order for a long time. Or if there is, it's again really small. And that is just a very difficult position for a manufacturer to be, because making small orders for a factory that is big, it's a waste of time and money. They cannot run a business on this. So that is the fourth reason within the unrealistic expectations. And another one is wrong fit. Very often, because you don't do enough research, or because you don't know much about the industry, and you get taken by the fact, like I said, that perhaps this factory works for famous brands and they said yes to you, you overlook the fact that perhaps it's just the wrong fit. Just because they said yes for whatever reason, it doesn't mean that it makes it right for you. You really need to spend the time and find the right factory to work with for you and your product at where you are, at the level where you are, and have the vision to grow. Perhaps that would not be forever the factory you work with, but it is the right factory for you and your product right now where you are. Reason number three is disorganized. So again, if you lack the knowledge of how everything works, you're not going to be organized. Very often, especially small brands working with small factories, working on CMT terms, what happens is that they would have to provide the factory with all their materials, and the factory will receive the box with all the materials. They would plan on their schedule when to start, because you're probably calling them, when will you start, etc. They would plan when to start. They will arrange everything for your production to start. They will open the box then, and only to find out that you're missing perhaps streams, perhaps parts of the materials, etc. Something is wrong, or all of a sudden, halfway through your production or sampling, you realize that something is wrong that could have been better, or you need to make some change, etc. And that is very difficult for a factory. They would have to stop the production, and again, they have wasted time setting up the machines for you or reorganizing people. People have to get used to the handle and the product they will be making, etc. So then they will have to scramble and fill in that gap with another client, and that is, again, it boils down to waste of time and money for them. So being organized, understanding what you have to prepare to send everything to the factory, so that there's once they start, there is no stoppages. It's really important. Being organized with the paperwork, with the information you need to provide them. Again, the lack of knowledge perhaps leads to the fact that you're not in a position to answer some of their questions. They might ring you and say, what kind of stitching do you want here? And if you don't know, that puts them in a difficult position, because ultimately they don't really want to take the decision for you, because if you're not happy, then all of a sudden it will be their fault. So being organized in terms of your admin, as well as organizing your knowledge in your head, it's really important. Reason number 4 is no sense of urgency, and that's a biggie. And actually, it took me a while to understand, because actually it's something that manufacturers weren't really voicing it. It was coming through conversations, but we weren't actually pinpointing it as a fault, as a problem. And we've in the end realized that another big issue for manufacturers working with small brands is just the lack of the lack of sense of urgency, especially if you haven't launched your brand. Because once you're in business, especially the bigger, more established brands, it's like a machine, it's like a hamster wheel. You have to keep going. There's X amount of collections you have to launch every season, or if you're showing at fashion weeks and fashion shows, the dates are set. So once you get going with the business, it's like a machine. You just slot into it and you have to keep going. But if you're small and if you even haven't launched, you don't have that sense of urgency. So you don't understand that manufacturers make money from production. You don't understand the fact that they hate sampling because they can't capitalize and monetize the amount of time and effort they're putting into the development process. And the fact that you take your time, and sometimes, one product might take months, sometimes even years to develop. It's super frustrating for a manufacturer. And again, sometimes they're in a situation where, what do? They have spent X amount of time until now, they can't see the end. Do they stop and waste everything they've done, or do they put a little bit more faith and keep going with you, and hopefully, fingers crossed again, you will not disappoint them? So understanding that once you start sampling, you're dealing with people who are in business is really important. When also another issue manufacturers have is that very often small brands and startups will take time to reply. They will literally might not know. They don't understand, again, the sense of urgency. But once they reply, they just want it like yesterday. Again, how quickly can you make it? How quickly can you make this change, etc. And that, again, is super frustrating for manufacturers. You have taken your sweet time, but now you're rushing them. And they have actually clients that they make money with, that they are working with, that they cannot just drop just because you just woke up and reply to their email. So it's really important to understand that the issue of lack of urgency is something that is top of the list of manufacturers why they don't want to work with small brands. You really need to understand that they're in the business of making money. That's their livelihood, that's their business. And for as long as you are dithering and not understanding what you want, trying to figure out, very often people, because they don't know what they want, they're indecisive. That indecisiveness, someone has to pay for it, and usually that's on the manufacturer side, and why should they be the one to pay? So for them, lately, it's so much easier to just say, no, thanks, Desi, please don't bring me small brands, startups, no startups, thanks. And where do you go? So you need to understand the issues and tackle them, and sense of urgency is really important. And then the fifth, the final big issue that I see is changes. Again, because you're disorganized, because you have lack of perhaps knowledge of the industry, etc., and you don't prepare enough in advance, you don't clarify, perhaps even sample, prototype your idea and be absolutely sure what you want to do, you're using the factory as a little bit of a lab testing studio. So they make a sample that is supposed to be perhaps final, and all of a sudden you show it to a friend says, oh, I don't really like this detail, and all of a sudden your confidence plummets and you start changing details. And factories hate that, because to you it might be a small detail, but it just means that they would have to change the pattern. Then they have to sample it again, which is more time. Then they would still, perhaps, even if they're not making money, they would have to charge you for this new sample. And yet you perhaps say, but why are you charging me again? There's this argument, and this negative energy is generated, questioning why they have made a new pattern, because you don't have the knowledge to understand what you have just done by just requesting yet again another challenge, another change. And actually, during the challenge, in one of the days, I explained to people that when you visually see what your changes mean to a manufacturer, it's probably easier to understand. But I was once put in that situation. I was working with an Italian manufacturer, and as any big brand, you think that when you're big, you can squeeze the manufacturers and you can get every wish. They should just do it because you keep on giving them good orders. So whatever you wake up and feel like doing, they should do it in order to get the orders. But so I had this manufacturer that I dearly loved working with, and we had a great relationship. And he kept on saying, please come and visit me, please come and visit me. And at this brand, we had a lot of core collections and then fashion collections that were more seasonal. And we would make little changes, and to us, it would be like, but come on, do the change. It's the same product. We're just changing, the corner from square to round, for instance. So we are doing this, we're doing that. It's stinky tiny. To us, was stinky tiny. So finally went to the factory in Italy, and he took me to a room where there was a big mountain in the center of the room. They had pushed all the desks and tables, big mountain of boxes. And I couldn't understand what he was showing me. And what he was showing me and explained to me was all the patterns they have had to make over the last 2 or 3 years of working with us that were used once and basta, as he would say, done, that's it. Then move on to the next one. And just every tiny little change that we made, like from square to rounded corners, from, I was doing leather goods at the time, from turned edge to cut edge, it was new patterns. More money for them. But also, what do they do with them? And he was like, you're telling me that I can't, you're telling me that you're going to come back to that idea in some time, which means I have to keep them. So it's space for me. It's taking space in my factory. I have also spent money, and all I got was like one order of perhaps 50 or 100 units, etc. So once I saw this massive mountain, that's when it kind of really hit me, and sometimes you just have to put yourself in the shoes of the manufacturers and understand that you need to be prepared. You need to work out your ideas as much as possible. Do paper patterns, hire a seamstress, do a little prototype, wear it, live with it. That's why it's called user testing. Use something until you feel confident enough that you are happy with the design. And with that, then go to a manufacturer. And just, perhaps make one little thing that you might have found out that you want to improve on, but just don't go with, a list of changes. Don't sample something and then do another change. Don't say this is the final and then go into production, halfway through production. Actually, I just woke up, someone gave me feedback, whatever, reason, and you want to change again. This is like a recipe for disaster. If you want to terminate really fast a relationship with someone, just do this one little trick. So that's it, really. The 5 reasons. So lack of knowledge. And, honestly, that's not such a big issue. Google has a lot. There's tons of blogs now, including our blog, where you can get that knowledge. And also, use visual. If you don't know something, find something that's visual. It's a visual industry. Find something visual, show what you want, and get them then to tell you what the terminology is. Make a list of that. Create your own glossary for the future so that you can speak their language. And be more prepared. Number 2, unrealistic expectations. You're in the business of fashion. People want to make money. So, do a critical path, learn about timelines, learn about costing, just ask questions of people, even call up a manufacturer and perhaps, ask them for a question, just to a sense check something. They're not going to say no, because long-term it would serve them better. But don't expect that, a factory is a school. If don't expect them to teach you that stuff because they can't charge you for that knowledge. And then you go somewhere else, or you realize that you can't go forward, you got it wrong, etc. Disorganized, be more organized, just, get some help, prepare yourself, just don't rush contacting a factory if you're just not ready. Don't send your materials, don't rush them to start a manufacturing order, sampling, whatever it is, if you're not ready, if you don't have everything, because once they start, they don't want to stop, they just want to finish it. Have a sense of urgency, understand that you have to, once you get, it's like a hamster wheel, you're in there, you have to keep moving, it and finish it as quickly as possible. A sampling, really, if you're organized and everything is in place, shouldn't take longer than 4 to 6 weeks from the factory side, because that's the time they need to arrange, make space for you, etc. But if you are stopping and, and starting, missing things, etc., nothing should take months to make, certainly not years. And I've been in that situation where it's taken years. And changing, do not make any changes. I mean, make little changes, but, be accepting and listen to what these changes would mean, what repercussions, because it's like little ripples in the water. What would happen if you make this change? And is it a change for you? Or is it a change for your client? Is it something that's going to add to the product and allow you to price it better, sell it better, make it more commercial? Or is it a vanity change, something that you just feel like it, your best friend, your boyfriend, whoever, said that it would be better? That's anecdotal feedback. It's not a change based on statistic. It's a vanity. So if you follow these 5 things, you will have much easier time working with manufacturers. And the final thing is not actually, this is just an advice, but very often people come into the fashion industry, small brands, fashionpreneurs from other industries. And they think that because they have been successful in another area and they know about finance, they used to project manage big projects, etc. Working in fashion would be easy. But what they overlook is the fact that they're starting from ground zero. They're not used to bootstrapping. And that is where mentoring and coaching comes. If you think about all the successful sportsmen and even business people, they all have mentors and coaches. And for a reason, you know, you need sometimes someone to help you to get you from here to there in a proven way, to save you costs and money, etc. To, you know, use their experience. You will be paying for the value they will provide you to get you as painlessly from A to B. So be a little bit more open-minded. There's so much ego in the fashion industry, but really if you're determined, if you are committed to wanting to create a brand and launch a product, do yourself a favor and perhaps, you know, take on someone to help you, to use their experience and get there. And with that in mind, I invite you to perhaps, you know, book a call if you want it with me and see how I can help you. I will post a link below of scheduling where you can book half an hour call. And you can ask me a question and I would, with no strings attached, answer your question and try to help you. If you then in the future wanted to work with me, etc., that's another proposition. But in the first instance, my aim is to help you guys just find and work in a better way, save money. It hurts me to see so much money wasted and so much, you know, pain created with people who have the good intentions, but they're just not organized, perhaps not committed for whatever reason, you know, and end up wasting money they could have spent in a much better way. So if you have any questions and you want to get in touch, feel free, get in touch. There's tons of free resources on our blog constantly being added. And I hope to be of service to you. And that is it. I'll see you soon. There'll be more of this coming forward. So I'll see you soon, guys.